Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has reiterated the importance of de-escalation after an apparent Israeli strike on Iran. Mr. Blinken was speaking at a G7 meeting in Italy. When asked, he refused to comment on reports that Israel had informed Washington of its plans before they came into effect. Mr. Blinken stressed the importance of reducing tensions and made clear that in Washington's view, Iran was to blame for the situation. Let's have a listen in.
Let me simply, first of all, repeat what our focus has been and what it remains. De-escalation, avoiding conflict, and so yes, calling on all concerned to exercise restraint. That's what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, and as necessary, that's what we'll continue to do. Again, that's reflected in the statement that you'll see coming from all of the G7 countries. On Rafah, we have been very clear about this. President Biden has been very clear about this. We cannot support a major military operation in Rafah. First, there are currently somewhere around 1.4 million people in Rafah. Many have been displaced from other parts of Gaza. In the first instance, it's imperative that people are able to get out of the way of any conflict. And doing that, getting people out of harm's way, is a monumental task for which we've yet to see a plan. And not only getting them out of harm's way, making sure that they can be supported with humanitarian assistance if they're out of harm's way. But second, even if people are largely out of harm's way, inevitably there's going to remain a pretty significant civilian population in Rafah. And we believe that a major military operation with a large presence of a civilian population would have terrible consequences for that population. We are committed, as Israel is, to ensuring that Gaza cannot be controlled by Hamas. We've seen the devastation and destruction that have resulted from Hamas's leadership and the actions that it's taken. And well before October 7th, what it was providing, or rather not providing, for the Palestinian people made clear that its concern had nothing to do with the Palestinian people and everything to do with its objectives to destroy Israel. So making sure that Hamas cannot repeat the events of October 7th, that's something that we're united in. But in terms of major military operations in Rafah, it's something that we don't support, and we believe that the objective can be achieved by other means.
That's a little bit of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was speaking in Capri earlier at that G7 meeting of foreign leaders, Secretary of States, foreign ministers. Now let's take a look at the events of the last 12 hours. Let's just give you a recap of what happened when. Well, state TV in Iran reported explosions near an army base and an airport in the city of Isfahan. They activated local air defence systems. Now, blasts have also been reported in the country's northwest, but the strike appears to have been limited in scope, with no casualties or major damage reported. Video online shows Iranian defence missiles being fired into the air. Now, commercial flights were initially diverted around Iranian airspace, but Iranian media now say all restrictions have been lifted. Well, Iran's state broadcaster IRIB downplayed reports of an attack. Let's have a listen to how that news was broken.
Reliable sources emphasize that all nuclear facilities and military centers in Isfahan and all parts of the country are completely secure, and no incident has occurred at these facilities and centers.
Well, with more on all of those developments, Siavash Ardalan from the BBC Persian Service joins me now from the newsroom. What more have we heard from Iran about what's happened?
The only confirmation we've had from Iranian authorities is that they managed to shoot down 3 drones, or what they're describing as quadrocopters, which are very small drones with only 4 rotaries and a very short range, which they said originated from inside the country. But no confirmation of what the Americans have told the media, that there has been a missile attack by Israel on Iran's military airbase in the city of Isfahan. We've heard about the sounds of explosion around that area. Iranians, in fact, woke up this morning to the sound of explosion, which Iranians said was the activation of their air defenses. The Iranian media has been playing this down. And as far as we're concerned, there's been a lot of quotes from American officials, Iranian officials, Israeli officials, all anonymous, nothing confirmed, that Israel has launched a missile attack at Iran. But there so far has been no solid proof of that. And if there's been an attempt to de-escalate on the part of the Israelis, they have actually succeeded.
Siavash, I guess the next question a lot of people want to know is what Iran's next steps might be. What is the sense in Iran from people that you've been talking to, you've been monitoring the media there? What is the sense of what that might be?
Well, let's first start from the public figures. Again, anonymous sources telling Iranian media that there will be no immediate retaliation. This is very significant given yesterday's threats by Iranian commanders that there will be an immediate response by Iran within seconds if Israel launches a massive attack or anything similar to the magnitude and scale of the attack launched by Iran against Israel. Some Iranian commanders had even warned that Iran might review its nuclear policy, perhaps hinting that Iran may make a dash for the nuclear bomb if its nuclear facilities are targeted. So now that the Iranian officials are saying that there will be no retaliation, it's a big sigh of relief for many Iranians who were bracing for a massive attack, and perhaps a disappointment for many hardliners, whether it be it in the Israeli government or whether in the Iranian opposition, who were bracing for a massive retaliation by Israel.
Okay, Siavash, thank you for the moment. Now, we'll be back with Siavash shortly for Your Questions Answered at 12:30 here in the UK. And you can also watch that around the world as well. It's about half an hour from now. And that's where you're welcome to send in your questions about anything relating to the developments overnight. And as well as Siavash, we'll have the BBC's Lise Doucette here with me in the studio to answer your questions, and Shashank Joshi as well. Now, there's been no official comment from Israel, but Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister, has tweeted a single word after those strikes. It was scarecrow, meaning feeble in Hebrew slang. Now, that suggests Israel was behind the attacks in Iran, but that the action was insufficient. Well, with more on all of that, let's speak to Yotam Confino, the foreign editor of Jewish News UK. Yotam's based in Israel. Welcome to BBC News. What's your assessment of why Israel went ahead with this strike?
I think, first of all, Israel backed itself into a corner by saying that anyone who attacks Israel directly will be met with a response. So Israel had to retaliate no matter what. And we've simply just been waiting for this attack for the past couple of days. We know that the war cabinet agreed pretty early on that they should attack Iran. And sources also said that Netanyahu, the prime minister, actually called off an attack in the last minute a couple of days ago. And this is mainly due to the United States and their pressure on Israel. If it were up to the UK and the US, Israel would not retaliate at all. But they knew that that was not an option. Israel had to respond to this major missile and drone attack, but they had to do it in a limited way so as not to drag the US and the UK and, of course, Iran into a wider regional war. This is why we're seeing this relatively limited strike. This is also why we haven't heard Prime Minister Netanyahu say anything about this strike yet. But I do think that this was the wisest and most calculated way to avoid a huge regional war, because Iran can now simply argue that it got away with a major attack on Israel, and also it can say that the small attack that Israel launched was nothing. So it can justify calling this incident, wrapping it simply. And Israel will do the same by saying that it attacked Iran, but it also has it's now enjoying full support from Western allies who are imposing sanctions on Iran.
Let me ask you about this, because everything you've said about, some of Israel's allies trying to talk Israel down from any sort of retaliation. I mean, those warnings were not heeded. We heard from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak here saying a few days ago that it was a moment for calm heads to prevail. Some analysts at the time thought that there might be some response, but they didn't expect it to come this quickly. What was the mood in Israel in the last few days around all of this?
I think everyone really expected this attack to come. Also, the sources that I spoke to, very close to the government, familiar with the issues, said it's a matter of days, really. The cabinet agreed early on there should be a response. So the mood was really tense, I think, because a lot of people were speculating what this strike would be. Would it be on Iranian nuclear sites? Would it be on military bases? Would it be a cyber attack? And eventually, Israel went with, I would say, a very soft response. And again, this is simply due to the pressure from the rest of the world. And I also think that this shows that neither Iran nor Israel are interested in a war. But in the Middle East, you cannot allow a country like Iran to launch a massive missile or drone attack without retaliating. This goes without saying, and this is why Israel had to do something.
OK, Yotam Confino, thank you very much for joining us there from Israel and sharing your thoughts. Now, we can speak to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landau, who joins us from Jerusalem, and our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal, who is in Washington. Let's start with you, Nomia. We've just heard from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, there. He didn't answer any questions directly commenting on the events overnight. Was that expected, do you think?
Yeah, he was pretty short, wasn't he? And the words that he kept using was de-escalation. And that is actually what sums up the Biden administration's approach to this. Ever since the attack on Israel by Iran last weekend, America has been very keen to de-escalate. Mr. Biden and other world leaders urging Israel not to retaliate in a way that would inflame a wider Middle East war. And yesterday, the US did impose this new round of sanctions on Iran. It's one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, this time aiming at its missile and drone program, aiming it at executives of that program, people who America said delivered those missiles to Iran's proxies throughout the Middle East. I think it was America's way of saying to Iran, look, there are ways that we can respond, to Israel, there are ways that we can respond to Iran that doesn't involve a military response, or certainly a wide-scale military response that we understand some Israeli leaders had wanted to begin with. Having said that, America's always keen to say, we cannot tell Israel what to do. But given the sort of relatively small response by Israel in the grand scheme of things, and the even smaller response by Iran, I imagine that the Biden administration will breathe a little bit more easily. They know that tensions will not disappear between both countries anytime soon, but it has lowered that immediate risk of an escalation. OK, stay with us, Nomia. Let's bring James in from Jerusalem. James, we just reported there that tweet on X from Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister. One word, it was the Hebrew word for scarecrow, intimating that perhaps the attack was feeble. What's been the reaction in the Israeli cabinet and amongst Israeli officials to the events overnight?
Well, the first point to make is overwhelmingly absolute silence. There has been no response from the Israelis at all. The Prime Minister has said nothing, the Cabinet has said nothing. All we have really of substance so far on the record are that one-word tweet by Mr. Ben-Gvir, the Security Minister, which most people are translating as meaning lame, and the response that prompted from Yair Lapid, Israel's opposition leader, who furiously accused Mr. Ben-Gvir of causing huge, heavy damage to Israel's reputation, opening up to ridicule. He said no security minister had ever done so much damage to Israel. And that's because of this. The assumption is that this attack, if it is indeed by Israel, was designed to send a message. It was limited, but it was also designed to say, look, Israel can target Iran deep within its territory, and it can strike targets pretty close to where its nuclear facilities are. In other words, that the military assaults that took place in the early hours of this morning had a political message too. It was sending signals, right? And if you accept that analysis, having your security minister say, oh, well, this attack was a bit lame, and undermines that strategy. And that is the implication of Mr. Lapid's criticism here, of effectively accusing Mr. Ben-Gvir of undermining what Israel was trying to achieve overnight, which seemed to be a modest, limited strike to respond to last week's massive strike by Iran in a way that didn't necessarily escalate, but also sent a warning to Iran that Israel could do more if it wanted.
Okay, let me ask you both one question, the same question, before you both go. I'll start with you again now, James. Where do you think this leaves the dynamic between Israel and the US?
Look, I think the key thing now for this is that I think, where do we go from here? And the next phase of this story is going to move back to Gaza. There have been very intense talks between the Americans and the Israelis over what happens next, over Israel's desired attack on Rafah in the south of Gaza. The Americans very concerned about the impact on the many hundreds of thousands of people crammed into that part of southern Gaza. At the moment, there's reports of no agreement between both sides over this. The question is, if this situation with Iran dials down a bit, if the temperature reduces, does that free up Israel for an opportunity to carry out its operation, its military operation in Gaza against remaining Hamas fighters there? And I think that's where the focus will shift if things do indeed stay dialed down with Iran.
And Nomia, same question to you.
Well, look, as I mentioned, I think for President Biden, who hasn't commented yet, we expect him to potentially later today. This is a sigh of relief in some respects, because he did not want escalation. He had been on the phone with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to show restraint. As I mentioned, the sanctions that they imposed yesterday was a way of saying to Israel, look, there are ways that we can punish Iran. But you've got to also remember that this is all playing out in an election year. President Biden's very strong standing with Israel has not gone down well with members of his Democratic Party, progressive members of the party, who believe that there should be conditions attached to any aid that is being sent to Israel. And there is more military aid that will be sent to Israel. There are members of the Democratic Party who completely stand with Biden's position also. And of course, you've got the opposition, the Republican Party, who are by and large very, very supportive of Israel, many of them tweeting support for what Israel did overnight. We'll see what President Biden has to say. He is on an election on the election campaign later today.
Nomia in Washington, D.C., James Landell in Jerusalem. Thanks to the both of you.